Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to be breaking down Joe Biden's recent CNBC interview and sit down, and we're going to be keeping an eye on Joe after he's basically been forced to give up his re-election campaign, as we found out in this interview, by the upper elites of the Democratic Party. Let's roll the tape and see what Joe Biden has been up to since being forced to step down.
We're living through history.
We really are.
Let's begin with your decision. You're at your home, Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, late July with your family, and you make this historic decision. Tell me the story.
Look, the polls we had showed that it was a neck-and-neck race. Would have been down to the wire. But what happened was a number of my Democratic colleagues in the House and Senate thought that I was going to hurt them in the races. And I was concerned if I stayed in the race, that would be the topic. You'd be interviewing about why did Nancy Pelosi say, why did someone, and I thought it'd be a real distraction.
And right from the start here, Joe Biden lets the cat out of the bag and reveals who his masters truly are. In the very first 45 seconds of this interview, Joe Biden revealed that who truly convinced him to drop out of this race was Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Barack Obama, and don't forget, Wall Street. Because they bought and paid for Joe Biden a long time ago. And Joe Biden, he's a good boy. He's gonna stay in the race until they tell him to drop out. Because he does exactly what the donors tell him to do. But let's continue on with the video.
Number two, when I ran the first time, I thought of myself as being a transition president. I can't even say how old I am. It's hard for me to get out of my mouth. And, but things got moving so quickly, it didn't happen. And the combination was that I thought it was a critical issue for me still, is not a joke, maintaining this democracy. But I thought it was important because although it's a great honor being president, I think I have an obligation to the country to do the most important thing we can do, and that is we must defeat Trump.
And these people want to talk about Donald Trump being the greatest threat to our democracy. Well, guess what? Donald Trump was already president for 4 years. And America is still the same, if not worse in many people's books, than it was before. So nobody's buying this propaganda of Donald Trump being the greatest threat to democracy, especially coming from Joe Biden, the guy who wrote the crime bill, the guy who voted for the Patriot Act, the guy who voted us into the Iraq war. So Joe Biden doesn't give a damn about democracy. The Democratic Party doesn't give a damn about democracy. And by the way, this entire talk about America being a democracy, don't let anybody propagandize you with that either, because America is not a democracy, it's an oligarchy. Like George Carlin said, it's one big club and you're not in it. And that club keeps getting smaller and smaller every single day.
On August 12th, Heather Heyer, a civil rights activist, was murdered in what the Justice Department called a hate-inspired act of domestic terrorism. Biden has long traced his decision to run in 2020 to that moment.
It really is the beginning of your journey to the presidency. As you look at American democracy 7 years later, how do you see it?
When I spoke to the mom who lost her daughter as a consequence of those neo-Nazis and white supremacists come out of fields in America with torches, carrying Nazi banners, singing the same sick anti-Semitic bile that was sung in Germany in the 30s. And when her daughter was killed, the press went to the then President Trump and said, "What do you think?" He said, "They're very fine people on both sides." And I knew then, I knew I had to do something. And that's when I decided to run, because democracy was literally at stake. And and then he evidenced everything that we thought. January 6th, when attack on the Capitol. Talked about now, because he now talks about making sure they're all let out of prison. They're going to pardon them. Think of this. Every other time the Ku Klux Klan's been involved, they wore hoods so they're not identified. Under his presidency, they came out of those woods with no hoods, knowing they had an ally. That's how I read it. They knew they had an ally in the White House.
And that's exactly how Joe Biden wants you to feel about anybody who supports Donald Trump. He wants you to believe that they're KKK, they're Nazis, they're racists, they hate you, and they hate everything about you. But guess what? In the same breath that Joe Biden will preach unity and division and healing the soul of this nation, he will show you to also hate your neighbor at the same time. And guess what? We can embrace all this unity and this division, or we can realize one thing. And that thing is that we're all American. And there are a lot of hardworking Americans in this country who need to realize that the battle is not against each other, it is not against your neighbor, but it is against those at the top. Wealthy elites who have taken the wealth of this country and ran away with it. And when I'm talking about wealthy elites, I'm talking about politicians like Joe Biden. Joe Biden, for 40 years, has served this country, and he's made it worse at every twist and turn. And we need to make sure that in the new world, when we finally conquer all this evil and all this corruption, that politicians like Joe Biden end up exactly where they belong, behind the bars of a jail cell. Well, there you have it, folks. We're fucked. But along the way, don't forget to subscribe.